back to episode 6 of Revolutionary Roads, a podcast of the North Carolina History Project here at the John Locke Foundation. I'm your host, Donald Bryson, and thanks for continuing on this journey through North Carolina's role in the American Revolution. And we've walked through a good bit of that, and if you've enjoyed this journey that we've taken so far, please like, share, subscribe to this podcast or wherever you're listening to your podcast and where it'll be available. We think we're doing a lot of really good work celebrating America's 250th anniversary and North Carolina's 250th anniversary, and we'd like to continue to tell that history. Today we're at episode 6, and we've walked through a lot of the history of North Carolina so far, from the War of Regulation that culminated in the Battle of Alamance in 1771 to the Edenton Tea Party in 1775. We've got the provincial congresses. We've got the Mecklenburg Declaration and the Mecklenburg Resolves in 1775. We have the Battle of Moores Creek Bridge, where the British were going to attempt an early invasion of the southern colonies, go through North Carolina, and cut off South Carolina and Georgia from Virginia and the rest of the northern colonies. That didn't happen. We had our first Patriot victory, sort of the first win for liberty in the South. And then we had, in our last conversation, we talked about the Halifax Resolves, which came in April 1776 and made North Carolina the first state to declare for independency, is the word that they used in the Halifax Resolves. And now that we've declared independence, we have to have our government. And that brings us to our conversation today. Our guest today is Jeanette Doran. Jeanette Doran is the I. Beverly Lake Jr. Chair in Constitutional Studies here at the John Locke Foundation. She's also the Executive Director of the North Carolina Institute for Constitutional Law, and just an all-around good person. We're so glad to have you here today.
Well, thank you so much, Donald. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So we declared, North Carolina declared independence in April of 1776. It took the other colony states a little while to catch up, but we know, and this will be the great big celebration in D.C. and Philadelphia and everywhere in 2026, where we celebrate the 250th anniversary of July 4th, 1776, and we have our national Declaration of Independence. But North Carolina, sort of, we kind of knew what we wanted to do, right?
Yeah, we were the trendsetters.
And so once we've declared independence from a government, we wanted to set up our own government. So what happens after Halifax?
Well, we ended up, after the colonial governor Martin fled, we were really at a loss. We were kind of cobbling together these de facto governments and pulling together provincial Congress. We made an announcement that we're going to be electing people to the 5th Congress, and that one of their...
The 4th was the Halifax Resolves.
Yes.
Right.
So shortly after that, there's an announcement, we're electing people for the 5th Congress, and one of the things that they're going to do is not only make the ordinary laws, but we're going to have them create a constitution. And so that's what happened. They got together in November of 1776, and it took them just over a month, which is an extraordinarily quick turnaround time if you think about it. And think about how long it takes us to enact complicated legislation today.
Right.
Now, we're talking about the foundation of our state government, and they put it together in just over a month. And it was 2 documents that we view as a single whole. And those were ratified in December of 1776. First, the Declaration of Rights, and then the next day, the Constitution creating the architecture of government. And we view those collectively as the first Constitution of North Carolina.
So let's talk about sort of the nuts and bolts of how they met. We have these provincial Congresses in North Carolina. We had the 4th at Halifax, and they've called the 5th. The 5th one that writes the Constitution that we're going to discuss today happens in New Bern. And so the 250th anniversary of that will actually be in November of 2026. And so we're in November of 1776. How did they make the call for the 5th Congress? Who decided it? When? Who elected these people? How does this work out?
So the representatives to the 5th Congress were elected following an announcement that, as I said, put out to all those who were eligible to vote, which was, of course, a much more restricted group than we would see in 2025.
Sure.
And they were told these are the people who are going to be creating our Constitution. And then that group put together a committee, a smaller committee, about 8 people. And they were the ones who put pen to paper or quill to paper, as it
Right.
may have been. And they did the drafting, heavily influenced by John Adams and by our sister states, as well as Enlightenment philosophers like John Locke.
Yeah, this is a story that's not many people, I think, know about. David McCullough writes about it in his John Adams biography, which I think is very interesting, but it shows up in a few other places. So North Carolina has declared independence in April 1776. In May and June, the Second Continental Congress is meeting, and then states like South Carolina and New York don't actually have direction on how to vote on independence, right? So they have to go back to their constituent assemblies back in their states and get direction. But the North Carolina delegates are twiddling their thumbs because they already have instruction, right? And so apparently William Hooper and John Penn of North Carolina approached John Adams saying, look, when we go back to North Carolina, it's going to be to write a constitution. We would like to know what your thoughts are. And so John Adams writes this pamphlet that actually ends up being much more widely circulated. And it's one you can read now called Thoughts on Government. And it's sort of looking at a preamble to all American constitutions, unless you're from Nebraska, because they have a unicameral legislature. But that's sort of the framework which I think some of them were working from, right?
Yes. Adams drafted what is, today we might call it the Dummy's Guide to Creating a State Constitution, because
Sure.
it really laid it out just like that. And states followed some of it very closely and others not so closely. Pennsylvania initially, for example, did not have bicameralism. It was unicameral. They also didn't have a governor initially.
That's interesting. Okay.
So when we think about North Carolina and how weak our governor was,
Right.
I mean, at least we had one.
In name only, but yes.
Yes. Largely ceremonial, as a matter of fact, but we had one. And that was not consistent with Adams' vision.
Right.
So we can see different states following some, but not all, some following more closely than others did.
Yeah, Adams, just to do a very quick outline of what's a very complex and rich document, and I urge you to get on the Google machine and search John Adams' Thoughts on Government and read it. He wanted 3 branches of government, the 3 branches that we know about, the executive, legislative, judicial. He was very adamant about the powers of those being separate, but he did want a stronger executive power. He thought that state constitutions and any constitution should have a Declaration of Rights or a Bill of Rights up front. There's some. And he insisted on there being a bicameral instead of unicameral legislature, so 2 chambers in the state legislature, so that power couldn't be concentrated in one body.
He warned of a mob.
He did.
Yes, that one chamber, if we had one chamber, it could become a mob.
Yeah. No, that.
And he was a man familiar with mobs.
He was very familiar. His cousin Samuel drummed up several mobs, and so that was generally what he put forward. And as we talk about what North Carolina's first constitution came to be, I think generally speaking, we followed that fairly closely, with the exception of the strong executive branch.
Yes, and Adams probably would have permitted while not universal suffrage, wider. Because he expressed some concern about representation for the middle, what he termed the middle and lower classes. And North Carolina initially required property ownership as a prerequisite to voting for the Senate. To vote for the House, one only had to be a free man and a taxpayer.
Interesting.
To vote for the Senate, one had to be both a free man and a property owner.
Okay.
And of course, to hold office, one had to meet even higher property ownership qualifications and be Protestant.
And be Protestant.
And be Protestant.
Right. Okay. That's interesting. What? So clearly John Adams influenced the first state constitution a lot. What other sort of models or philosophies did the North Carolina framers look at in addition to John Adams' writings?
So we can see very close parallels with Virginia, Maryland, and Pennsylvania in terms of the actual execution of the document,
Right.
the nuts and bolts of it. But the theory behind it drew from John Locke, from Rousseau, from Montesquieu. So that was the kind of the philosophy behind it.
Okay.
But the structure of it, how we worded things, we often drew from, again, Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
Those were our heavier influences.
That's interesting. Now, were we the first state to come up with our own constitution post-independence?
There's a little bit of debate about that.
Okay.
Historians debate everything.
Sure they do.
Yeah,
What's
that's
the
what
oldest
they
public
do.
university?
Oh,
North Carolina and Georgia have different answers on that.
And we have constitutional origins for ours, and that plays into part of the debate as
Okay.
well.
Interesting.
Whether we really gave meaning to that, but that's a whole different rabbit hole.
So where do you come down on the question, though?
My position is that we were, in part because we started the process so much earlier.
Okay.
And we completed it so much faster. And we were it's very important to recognize that we created our Declaration of Rights and then the structure of government in December of 1776. Like, that's really early in the process of the American Revolution.
Yeah.
That was a very gutsy move. It was done very quickly in a time when travel was slow and cumbersome, and even just writing, the physical process of writing and drafting was very slow for everyone. Record keeping is mostly reliant on diary entries and correspondence.
Yeah.
So it can be sketchy, but I also have a bias toward North Carolina.
Fair enough. I mean, who wouldn't have a bias?
At least I'm open about it.
I think that's fair. So who were sort of the leaders of the Fifth Provincial Congress as we get into the writing of the Constitution?
Yeah, I think one of the most important members, and part of why I say this is because of his later role as a justice, was Samuel Ashe.
Okay.
One of the things that's so fascinating about North Carolina's history, and we have what I believe to be the first published decision on judicial review. It predates Marbury versus Madison that we all learned about as school children.
It takes some doing to predate Marbury versus Madison.
But and we did by about 15 years. So he was not only on the committee that wrote the Declaration of Rights in 1776 Constitution, but he was involved in Baird v. Singleton. And one of the things that he wrote about that 1776 Constitution is he described us as a people shipwrecked, marooned on an island without law, without government, without magistrates, without anything, and just figuring it out as we went along. And so we saw his influence with the creation of the Constitution initially, and then his role as a justice, having to see where the rubber meets the road and how is this really playing out, and and there had to have been a moment where he scratched his head and thought, boy, maybe we should have worded that a little bit.
That's not what I meant when I wrote that down.
and anyone who's written things has had that experience where you go back to it a few years later and say, "Ooh, with the benefit of hindsight, I'd have done that a little differently." So he's an interesting figure in that way.
Yeah.
And probably among the more influential of the drafters.
Sure. Another name that pops up, they elected him president of the Congress, was Richard Caswell. And I don't know how much Caswell had to do with the actual drafting of the document, but for listeners of the podcast, he has popped up everywhere. He and to remind everybody, he started out for the scope of time that we're talking about in Revolutionary Roads, he was an officer under Governor Tryon at the Battle of Alamance, fighting against the regulators. And then he shows up again as an officer leading the Patriots against the Loyalists at the Battle of Morris Creek. And then he's also one of the people at Halifax for the Halifax Resolves. He keeps popping up over and over again, but one of the byproducts of the 5th Provincial Congress and the First Constitution is that Richard Caswell turns out to be the first governor of the state. And he just like a bad penny, not a bad penny. He did a lot of things for the state, but he just keeps showing up over and over again. It's very interesting.
Well, it's also an impressive evolution of a man. Sometimes we criticize politicians in contemporary times. We often criticize politicians who change their position. We say, oh, he's waffling, she's waffling. Well, sometimes circumstances evolve, your opinions are shaped over the course of decades. Different things happen, and you change your mind, you change your position. And I think he's an extraordinary example of that. To have gone from being one of the guys fighting the regulators to turning around like, I've completely changed my position. And that's a 180 if ever there was one.
No, absolutely. And if you go online and look at the list of people that were at this Congress, you see a lot of county names, a lot of town names. Wiley Jones, namesake for Jones County, and we'll talk a lot about him when we talk about ratification of the U.S. Constitution and the Anti-Federalist movement.
He's very vocal.
Right. William Graham, the namesake of Graham County, shows up there. You'll see Abner Nash for Nash County and Nashville. Just a lot of namesakes for places we talk about every day here. So let's get to the heart of it. What did the Constitution do?
Well,
I mean, a lot of things, presumably, right?
First and foremost, it started off with the Declaration of Rights, and it is extraordinary in that we did that before we got to the nuts and bolts of the architecture, how we're going to set up government. So we front-loaded with protections for the people. And you contrast that with the U.S. Constitution, where it starts with the organization and architecture of government, and then they tack on the Bill of Rights, really only to make sure that they could get the U.S. Constitution ratified.
By North Carolina, but yes.
Yes, by us. But we were front and center that was the first thing we were doing. And we did that a day before we set up the structure of government.
Was that considered radical to have a Declaration of Rights?
Well, it would have been to the King of England.
Sure, fair enough. Fair enough.
So to the people at large, yes and no. A lot of what we have in our Declaration of Rights, some of it was modeled after what we had seen in other states, but a lot of it goes back to 1689, the English Bill of Rights. Some of it goes as far back as 1215 to the Magna Carta. So some of those ideas had been around for a long time. The idea, however, of popular sovereignty, which had been so championed by Rousseau, and prior to Rousseau, John Locke, the idea that the power is with the people and they have a right to alter and abolish their government. We see that in a Declaration of Rights, and that was radical. That was hugely radical. And serves as a reminder to us today, because those concepts carry through to our current Constitution even, that we have a right, that the power rests with the people, and more fundamentally, we have a right to change our foundational document.
So it's interesting that you bring up Locke and Rousseau, because what you talked about is where they agreed, that people have natural rights and they have rights to alter or abolish or change their government, and then their ideas separate. Because Locke would say political power sits with the people and should rest with the people dispersed through society. And Rousseau would say, no, the power of the people lies with the people and then should be gelled together within the power of the government that only exists at the will of the people. And so when you have, I would argue that when you have the U.S. Constitution that comes out in the 1780s, and then you have the French Constitution that eventually comes out, or the French Declaration of Rights, you have you see the difference of positive rights and negative rights that you get from Locke and Rousseau. Can you talk a little bit? This is some weighty stuff, but can you talk a little bit about positive rights and negative rights?
Well, let's frame it in the context of our Declaration of Rights.
Okay.
So our Declaration of Rights in North Carolina, going back to 1776, speaks very much in terms of what the rights of the people are, and protecting those. You can contrast that with other state constitutions and even the U.S. Constitution, where you talk about what government can't do. So it is
Congress shall make no law that.
correct.
Right. That's a negative right.
Rather than the very positive looking freedom of press is one of the great bulwarks and shall not be infringed. So we start with that. And that's a more concrete way, I think, of looking at those philosophical differences. Is it just an affirmation of what we are naturally endowed with by our Creator?
Right.
Or are we talking about preventing government, limiting government?
Right.
We do both in our state constitution, but we start with these very positive statements about the right of the people.
Right. So the Constitution of North Carolina is different from the federal Constitution, and it's still different. This is, we are on, depending on how you're counting, on our second or third iteration of the state constitution. But even going back to the first state constitution from November of 1776 that we're discussing today, it looks different than the federal constitution that ends up passing in the 1780s. We hear a lot of talking heads on cable television talk about we have 3 equal branches of government. Is that true of North Carolina?
No. That is it feels good to say that sometimes. What our Constitution does, and the state Constitution actually spells out the separation of the 3 different branches. We glean that from the structure of the U.S. Constitution, but it doesn't have a specific clause that says the 3 branches are separate.
Right.
The state constitution does, and has since 1776, but at no point does it say equal.
No.
And
Separate, yes.
so they're distinct. And when we look back to the earliest days of our state, it was, and historians have described it as a legislative oligarchy, because the legislature selected the governor, the legislature selected the judges.
Yep.
They controlled
And the
just about everything. Yes, the senators. There was very little power dispersed to the other branches. As I said a few minutes ago, there are times that the original governors were described as merely ceremonial. So we had a very, very strong legislative branch. We've never had 3 equal branches.
No.
We didn't even give the governor a veto until 1996.
Right.
Literally 2 centuries passed.
Right.
We were the last state in the union to give a governor the veto. The drafters of our 1776 Constitution knew very well the abuses of an excessive executive.
Right.
Now, they may have overcorrected in 1776.
They were very concerned about William Tryon. Like, that's all they were seeing. Right?
Josiah Martin as well.
Sure.
So, Tryon gets all the attention, but he was not the only bad actor in that phase. But we may have initially overcorrected by having an effectively neutered executive, but we've never had an equal branch. And if one thinks about it, legislators have the shortest term and are therefore most accountable to the people.
Sure.
So it makes sense that they would be a more powerful branch. And they're the ones with the power of the purse. They're the ones with the power of taxation.
Right.
So we want that power to be in the hands of people who are most accountable, most frequently accountable to the people.
We're in November 1776. So to go into 1777 and even beyond the Revolution a little bit, how did this shape early governance in North Carolina?
Well, I mentioned just a second ago, there are some historians who have described it as a legislative oligarchy.
Right.
Which I think if you look back to the 1770s, 1780s, that would not have been an overstatement of the situation at the time. Another interesting fact, the 1776 Constitution did not include any amendment provisions. So there was no mechanism to amend it.
Interesting. Or was there even a mechanism for like a convention
Well,
to amend it?
That's what they ended up doing is,
Okay.
again,
We gotta fix this.
yeah, well, and again, as Samuel Ashe said, we were people shipwrecked, cast marooned on an island with no government, no law. We were just we were making it up as we went along,
Right.
basically. So the original Constitution had no procedures laid out in it for amendment. We kind of just sort of made it up by calling a convention, and we started to slowly make some changes. We didn't see significant constitutional change until 1835, and that's when we shifted around a few things, and we started to give the governor a little bit more power, not a lot more. Baby steps. We still had the training wheels on the executive branch,
Sure.
but we started to make some changes gradually at just before the end of the 18th century, and then we saw a cluster of more significant reforms early in 1835. So we saw some change late 1700s, and the more significant notable change in 1835. Not a new constitution yet. We didn't get that until 1868, but we saw pretty significant changes in 1835. Some for good, some not.
Okay. So you mentioned earlier that we drew from other state constitutions, but those states were also forming governments at the same time that we were forming governments. What you mind giving, if you can, any specific examples of some real differences or real similarities between, you'd mentioned Virginia or Pennsylvania?
Sure.
What did they, those heathens in South Carolina do?
Well, Pennsylvania has the obvious examples. They were unicameral, not bicameral. They didn't have a governor. If we look at the property,
That's a real oligarchy, like a real one.
Oh, yes. Virginia had bicameralism. They still had a weak governor. Frankly, most every state did, because again, they had all been burned by a monarchy,
Right.
and by a colonial governor. I mean, that was not unique to North Carolina.
Sure.
That was a common problem. So it mirrors that when we look at things like qualifications for voting. Maryland had much tighter qualifications, higher, harder to satisfy property ownership requirements in order to be eligible to vote. We had Pennsylvania, which had not quite universal suffrage, but they had a much, for the time, and let's not look at this through the lens of 2025.
Right.
If we're talking 1776, they had a much more broadly dispersed electoral power, fewer qualifications to vote. Virginia they still had a strong governor, but still had a weak governor, I should say. I apologize. Virginia still had a weak governor, but it was a little bit stronger than North Carolina. They had a more independent judiciary, not anything that we would recognize through a contemporary lens.
Sure.
When we look at, say, either the U.S. Supreme Court or state Supreme Courts. But we had a very weak judiciary, a very, very weak, practically neutered ceremonial governor. So in those big areas, in terms of the structure of government, the separation of powers, and voting rights, we have some points of compare and contrast with those states that are most like ours and most influenced either the structure of government in our Constitution or the Declaration of Rights.
Sure. How were the chambers of the legislature set up in the first Constitution?
It was more closely tied to towns.
Okay.
And what were called boroughs, very tied to counties, but towns and boroughs. So when we look originally, there were assignments of representation either at the provincial Congress that created the Constitution, and thereafter in our state Constitution. We looked pretty closely at counties and then these larger areas of city, town, boroughs,
Right.
And dispersed representation in that way.
Right.
But it's very unlike what we have now, and I think they would all be astonished if they knew anything about North Carolina's history of redistricting litigation.
Right. No, probably so. If you go online and look at the list of representatives to the Fifth Provincial Congress, you'll see, people represented different counties. Johnston County, or it's interesting. Richard Caswell is listed as representing Dobbs County. There is no Dobbs County right now. There's also a Tryon County. Dobbs County apparently existed. It was taken out of Johnston County. Did exist at the time. It was taken out of Johnston County, and the county seat was actually Kingston, which is now Kinston. And there's a really funny story post-revolution about how they were really upset that down there when the Federalist sect of politics in North Carolina was very upset that the Anti-Federalists had won and that Richard Caswell was governor. And so they stole the ballot box and they rioted. And I'm like, oh, so not much has changed in American politics then. Great. Good to know. But if you keep going down the list, you'll see that there are people just representing towns. I think John Penn was back from the Continental Congress there, and he's listed as representing the town of Wilmington, to your point.
Yeah. Districts as we know them today just didn't exist.
Right.
It's also important to remember we have 100 counties now. We did not
No.
in 1776. And that it can be very difficult to overcome the instinctive desire to look at something through what we already know. So we already know there are 100 counties. We already have a basic familiarity with districts and the redistricting and reapportionment process. None of that.
Right. Wasn't a thing.
It just wasn't there. And again, they're making this up as they go along. They're cobbling together a little bit of what they knew and had been familiar with through colonial assemblies, what they had cobbled together when they no longer were willing to yield to the British Crown, and they were kind of coming up with a de facto government and councils of safety, as they were known. But nothing like our contemporary concepts of either Senate or House districts.
Yeah, senators were basically representing counties.
For the most part.
For the most part. And there's been talk of a constitutional amendment to sort of bring that back over the past couple of years at the modern General Assembly to have a constitutional amendment where a senator represents two counties, period. And that's sort of a head scratcher when you're thinking about like Mecklenburg County or Wake County, a really large county. But then you think about some of the senators from the eastern part of the state who represent 6 counties, and they only have so much money that they're able to carve out of the state budget for a new fire station or school construction fund. And they've got which county of the six do they pick for that funding? And that does, I can see how that complicates the process. So I can also see how, one senator for Wake County and Johnston County, period. That's it. How that also really complicates the process.
Sure. And our Constitution now has a provision, the whole county provision, which has been often litigated in recent decades.
Right.
But that is a carryover from the earliest days of North Carolina when people identified largely with their county. And if you look through, even today, look through the appointments bill out of the General Assembly, you will see so-and-so of X county appointed to various boards or commissions.
Right.
I have been appointed to boards and commissions over the years, and it's Jeanette, Doran of, and my home county.
Right.
That's standard. We identify people that way, and we have for a very long time.
Yeah.
But what the counties are, and in the chaos of 1776, it wasn't clear
Right.
what the counties were, what the county lines would be.
No.
Today we look back and we don't think anything of calling Mecklenburg County,
Right.
but that has royal origins.
Right.
So if you were a hardcore patriot and you had shed blood, sweat, and tears, lost your loved ones fighting for American independence, I can see you sitting around thinking, I don't want to say I'm from Mecklenburg County.
Yeah. No, you don't. And people who listen to the podcast, when we talked about the Mecklenburg Declaration, we talked about Charlotte and the fact that George III had married Queen Charlotte. And Queen Charlotte was not English. She was actually German, and she was from the German state or small nation, mini nation, principality, whatever you want to call it, of Mecklenburg. And so we have Charlotte in Mecklenburg County. And so those are your royal origins. Didn't we just fight these guys?
Well, yeah, and we a lot of people don't know that history. They don't know that that's why Charlotte is the Queen City.
That's right.
But when you say that to them, and then you think, again, these are we're talking about revolutionaries. We're talking about rebels who put their life on the line for years to establish our independence. It's a big ask to have that same person say, "Oh yeah, I'm John Doe and I'm from Mecklenburg County."
Yeah. No, that is absolutely.
That would have rubbed you raw, Donald.
Yeah.
And I knew you well enough to know.
No, it would. It definitely would have. Absolutely. So we eventually got an amendment process in the state constitution, and we had some constitutional conventions over the years. You mentioned 1835, and there was 1865 post Civil War.
1868 is our
1868
sort of middle space constitution.
And then we could call it the 1970s, whatever we want to call it. Was it a constitutional convention? Was it just some amendments? I don't know. The question that I'm getting to is, even though it's been amended over time, how does the modern, as of 2025, Constitution of North Carolina compare to the original that was written, now 249 years ago?
Well, it's more detailed, which stands to reason. But we've kept certain fundamentals. We still front load with the Declaration of Rights. That's our Article 1. And then we lay out the branches of government. Then we have whole articles that are dedicated to specific subject matter areas like education.
Right. Which has been litigated a good bit over the past 25 years.
We have an entire section now on suffrage. We have an entire section a section of the Constitution's an article. And articles are then broken down into sections, but we have an entire article for finance. And I think that's something that would have very much surprised the drafters of 1776 to think that they were in the throes of their fight for independence, fueled in many ways by taxation,
Right.
excessive taxation. And now we have an entire article of the state constitution that's committed to finance,
Right.
which isn't all taxes.
But there is a cap on an income tax, which the existence of an income tax would have ruffled some feathers.
Yes, quite a few. I think the general framework is what we saw in 1776, with some adjustments to the distribution of power among the branches of government. But we've also seen it flesh out in more detail, things like education and suffrage, eligibility to office. All of that has been refined over time, sometimes for the better, and some would say sometimes not for the better.
So in the scheme of North Carolina history, and even in American history, in the sort of a global look of the American Revolution, as we're winding up, what would you say is the legacy of the Fifth Provincial Congress of North Carolina?
North Carolina's fundamental freedoms.
Okay.
They took such a bold and assertive approach to it. It was extraordinary, and it must have been genuinely terrifying in that time to just so forcefully stand up against the crown. Britain was a mighty force.
Right.
So at the same time that they are standing up to Britain, to England, to the crown, to all of that power, all of that military might, they aren't just fighting for the day.
Right.
They're fighting for the future.
Yeah.
They are forward looking
Yeah.
and doing the best that they can, shipwrecked on an island with no law, no government.
Yeah.
And that's an extraordinary undertaking. And we owe them a great debt of gratitude.
Yeah. I think that's right. I think it's a terrifying thing to have to put theory to practice, which is what they did. They were marooned on an island, right?
Well, the Constitution of 1776 was ambitious and bold and radical in theory, and it was cautious in practice.
Sure.
And that gave us the opportunity to go forward and create what we have now.
Yeah.
And it's a pretty awesome North Carolina.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think that's very well said. Well, thanks for joining us today. Really appreciate everything that you've added to this. This has been an enlightening, no pun intended, conversation for me, and I thought I knew the Constitution fairly well. But if you've enjoyed this conversation today, please like and subscribe, share with your friends about this great journey that we're taking through North Carolina's history. Check out Jeanette's work for the John Locke Foundation or the Institute or the North Carolina Institute for Constitutional Law. She does great work in doing legal analysis on state and federal constitution here at the John Locke Foundation. Join us next time in episode 7, and we look forward to seeing you.